My name is Kathy Wilson and I'm the current chair of VMIAC, and it's fabulous to see so many people here, and I so look forward to hearing you as well. I wish, first of all, of course, to acknowledge the traditional owners. So VMIAC does work across the state of Victoria and acknowledges the many nations that have lived and cared for this sacred land over so many thousands of years. We pay deepest respect to the traditional custodians and their elders, past, present, and emerging, and thank them for their wisdom and their generosity. We acknowledge that this land was never ceded, always were, always will be. And two, we support the Uluru Statement from the heart and hope that every Victorian will be inspired to take this vision forward with deep acknowledgement. So, hello all of you, and thank you for being here. I'm not going to spend too much time, just to say it's really important for VMIAC to be ready and out early in response to the work that's being done on the Act, knowing that the time frame was short. So we very appreciate, and of course, just a little sidetrack, we did get an increased budget that we have to stretch many ways. We're grateful for the increased budget that came down as part of the Victorian state budget. But one of our very first priorities is to increase our resourcing in the membership area. So I just wanted to acknowledge the members and people with lived experience who contributed to this, and say that it is and it will continue to remain our priority to be connected to members and to encourage voice and to listen. And this project is very much part of doing that. And VMIAC could not have done this or made it happen so quickly without Indigo and Verinda, who worked day and night to make this happen in time to be able to set ourselves up for the white paper release. So I particularly wanted to acknowledge and thank them, not just for doing a good job, but for doing what it took to get it done and to make sure consumer voice is ready to go. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. You will have received a copy of this by email, I hope, all of you. And if you haven't, we'll make sure Robin gets it to you ASAP. Just put a note in chat.
It's on our website, and I'll send the link now.
Cool bananas. And so I think without saying very much more, I would like to hand over to Indigo and to Verinda and to ask you to actually be the official launchers of this really important piece of work, our first consultation since the recommendations have been out. Over to you.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Well, as requested, we have the official launch spectacular video. Did it work?
Yes, it's working.
Yay!
Hey!
Acknowledgements to Robin for creating our virtual fireworks. Okay. And now I'm going to see if I can be clever and just flick to our slides. Did that work too?
It did.
Yep.
This is an auspicious beginning. We'll see how it goes. So I'm Indigo and Verinda.
Hi, I'm Verinda. Remember where I put my camera.
Before we get into the presentation, we'd also just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all on today as well. And myself and Verinda are on the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. We also acknowledge that this land was never ceded, and we pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any who might be here with us today. And Verinda, I'm going to hand over to you to let people know how we got this process going.
Thanks, Indy. So this consultation, as Kathy intimated, was very fast, and we were required to do it in a very short period of time. So we developed up a survey with 35 questions that went out. We had initially 251 people accessing the service with 180 completions, which is a phenomenal result in a 10-day period. To follow up on that and to dig deeper into the questions and the responses from the survey, we had 6 focus groups. We had a total of 39 participants, and we had a couple of special focuses in that focus group. So we, Julie Dempsey, who's here today, hi Julie, did one with a couple of people from forensic care, and we had a specific one for members of SFE, which is VLA. So we did just do some targeted consultations through those focus groups. We had a dedicated email and had some contributions through there. We completed this process in 2.5 weeks. So this is a really great example of good consultation done fast. Yay.
Passion and caffeine also, I think, played a role.
Yeah. Do we go to the next slide, Indy?
Sure.
So briefly, we covered these 5 topics: seclusion and restraint, compulsory treatment, information sharing, the new statutory bodies that were recommended, and as I said, we had a small section on forensic services. So just to, one of the things that we did in responding to the department and the people that were writing it was we asked people in the focus group to put up some words about what they were feeling about this process, what they were feeling about the new act coming. And this is the word cloud that came of that. And what we can see is that people were hopeful, but also really frustrated, annoyed. You know, there's a bit of apprehension, but there was also some excitement. So really mixed feelings about this process.
Yeah, and we related to that because do you remember, we're feeling all of those things as well.
Absolutely, absolutely we were.
Still am.
Still am, yes. It continues. So very briefly, our thematic highlights, so the things that really came through really strongly is that, as we expected, there's no consensus on any of these issues, but there was a lot of really strong majorities. So that's important to both note those people that didn't agree and be aware of that position, but that there was this very strong message, this is what we wanted. One of the things that came through really strongly was about binding advanced care directives and having real visible accountability from the sector. It's something that we see is currently lacking, and consumers were really asking for visible accountability by services. We also really acknowledged in this, both in the comments in the survey and in the focus group, that there was a real generosity of spirit, both towards the sector, so understanding some of the restraints and some of the pressures the system is under, but also to other people in the groups, other consumers, other people trying to make a change and trying to make a difference. So we really just wanted to acknowledge that generosity of spirit. So I'm going to hand back over to Indy to go into detail on some of the findings.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brenda. I hope we're not going at too fast a pace, everyone. We're quite conscious that we've got our results is like a 78-page report, and we want to give you as much as we can, but also not overwhelm everyone. So there'll be time for questions and discussion later. So I'll just talk to you a little bit about seclusion and restraint. So this is obviously such an important issue for so many of us who've used mental health services. It can be some of the most traumatizing experiences that people have, but of course not the only kind of traumatic experience. And there's been growing focus on seclusion and restraint reduction for many years now. But of course, one of the most exciting recommendations from the Royal Commission was the elimination of seclusion restraint. And as someone who's been secluded myself, that was very exciting to hear, kind of, mostly, but not entirely. So we asked people in the survey a variety of questions here about anything that could go into the new Act that would be important in reducing and moving to eliminating seclusion and restraint. And you can see on this slide that the 4 options that we put up all had majority support, not massive majority support, but, you know, from 59 to 69%. So, you know, around 2/3 support, which is quite strong. So things like mandatory conditions when seclusion and restraint must immediately end, that should be legislated. That the target, so the Royal Commission, and folks may or may not know, I'm not sure, actually has set recommended targets to be changed every 2 years for seclusion and restraint in their big report. And so we asked, should they be in the Act as well? We asked about, should the Act say that it's going to be eliminated within 10 years? Should the reductions be linked to the funding for services? So there was support for all of those. And we'll note as we're going through that, you know, the white paper, and Chris will speak more about this later, has come out. We don't see particularly strong, it's not clear to us that any of these kinds of things that people voted on are in the white paper for the new Act. And we wanted to share as well, we collected, and you'll see in the report, lots of quotes from people that folks gave so generously. And when we were talking about seclusion and restraint, there was, of course, a lot of discussion about what it means to people to go through that experience. But there was a really strong theme that came out in comments in the survey and in the focus groups, separate to the questions we asked. And this was the comment that came out, and I don't think anyone will be surprised. And this is a perfect example. It shouldn't take 10 years to find a less degrading way to help manage distress and maintain safety. And the message that went with that from people was just do it already. And so we just wanted to reflect back, because we know this is so important, that message was loud and clear, and we've done our best in the report to make that loud and clear. Nevertheless, the Royal Commission's recommended 10 years, and we're interested to see what might make it into the Act. Chemical restraint was another really important topic that we looked at, because we knew the Royal Commission recommended defining this in the Act and then regulating it, and that's never happened before in mental health in Victoria. And so we really wanted to seek clarification from people in the focus groups. We asked questions in the survey about what's the best way to define it, and the results that we got were not clear in terms of what's the best way to define it. So in the focus groups, we did a lot of discussion about what it means to define this differently. And then we got people to rank the different ways to define it, from 1 being the best to 6 being the lowest. And so these are the options here. And you can see it's because some of them got similar scores. That's why we don't have a 1 or a 6 here on this list. But the Royal Commission had talked about defining this as what's in the mind of the person who is restraining us. So if the clinician says, I didn't mean to control your behaviour, then they don't have to record it as chemical restraint. And what came out clearly in the conversations was that that's not acceptable, because we can't know what's in the mind of a clinician. It can't be objectively measured or observed. And what about what's in the experience of the person on the other end? And so it was very clear from people in the groups that impact on consumer really matters, and that should matter most. And we were really pleased to see in the white paper that what they've put forward so far is that both of these are included, the experience of the consumer and the intent of the clinician. And so I'm heading back to you now, Vrinda, for compulsory treatment.
So we asked quite a lot of questions on compulsory treatment, and so I'll try and go through quite quickly, because we're now behind time a little bit. It's always going to be a problem for both Indy and I, keeping so much information into a short time frame. So do you want to flip on to the next one? So the first question we had around compulsory treatment is around the word serious. So the current Act talks about serious risk in particular. And so we asked a series of questions about this. We're going to share a quote with you, because it just for us really sparked something in us. One of the things that clinicians have been able to say is that if you weren't treated compulsorily, there would be a serious risk to your reputation. And one consumer said, nothing damages, do you want to push it up?
Yep.
Nothing damages your reputation like people finding out you've been a compulsory patient. So to actually use that as a reason for compulsory treatment just seems like an oxymoron. So next slide, Indy. We went to thinking about what defining serious meant, and we had these categories, if you like. The orange line, above the orange line, is what's like a low bar. If you include these things, you're going to see lots of compulsory treatment, but once you step below the solid bar, you start reducing the number of compulsory treatments that would be able to be included. It's also the things below the line are also about what other people are saying about you. Mostly they're about what gets observed by other people. Next slide.
Yep, and just these symbols on the side, that the message we got from people in the survey was that consumers didn't want these things being reasons for compulsory treatment, the things above that, and that's the big strike through. And some people, a lot of people said yes to physical injury to self, but only in particular situations. And most people agreed that these two reasons could be justifications for compulsory treatment.
Sorry, my all your faces are over that side of my slide, so I forgot about that. So what we did in the focus group was drill down into that physical injury to self and really try and understand that, what that actually meant. So we defined different levels of physical injury, going from any type of physical injury at one end, so the lowest threshold, through to life-threatening. When we spoke about maiming, we spoke about permanent disability or disabling of a limb or a part of your physical functioning. So that's maiming as opposed to threatening life. And what we found here is 88% of people agreed that was the end, that serious, that risk of physical injury to self needed to sit at. It needed to be really like absolutely a threat to life or physically maiming. And there was a small percentage, 15%, absolutely not insignificant, but smaller percent that said that physical injury under any conditions shouldn't be a justification. And there was a 12% that said that it was like any sort of physical injury should be included. It just goes to show the breadth. But we had this very clear evidence of 88% saying it needed to be quite serious. So the next bit we went to was defining last resort. So one of the things the RC Commission recommendations does is move us from the language about least restrictive intervention to last resort. And we wanted to work out what last resort actually means. When we sort of thought about that, we thought that services might think of it as last resort means only offering treatments that are convenient for us as a service, offering treatments that we know about, or offering treatments that we have here in the service. It is one of the, currently in the current Act, it's one of the reasons they can override an advance statement is that the treatment's not offered in the service. So that was something we wanted to have a think about with consumers. Or does it mean that we've exhausted all these treatment options? They've actually tried them. People have tried all of them. They've really looked at everything that's possible. And in addition, because we know how much social determinants, those things that have housing, support, safety mean to people who use services, whether that needs to be taken into account for last resort as well. So we asked a whole lot of questions around this, and what we found was in terms of social determinants. Again, most people said that all of these things needed to be attended to before you could say you're going to last resort. So if people are not safe, if they're not free from violence, if their housing is at risk, if they're in severe financial stress, then you've not addressed the issues that most affect people in distress. What's pleasing, again, you'll see these little ticks. We've picked up that this has been included in the white paper. There is a mention about safe and secure housing. So that's a good thing. We need to strengthen it though. One of the messages we hope you get from this is just because there's a tick next to it, and we're saying it's in the white paper, it doesn't mean you cannot mention it. We still need to underline how important these things are in the white paper submissions. So in terms of other treatments and support options, again, really high evidence that people are saying that these all need to be offered before you can get to last resort. And again, we're seeing in the white paper, trauma services, peer support, talking therapies and respite services are all included that need to be considered. I think it's something like that is the language in the white paper.
Yeah, not quite as strong as people talked about has to be offered to us, because what's not clear to us at the moment is, does that mean that we get to consider whether we want to try talking therapy or respite, or does it mean that the psychiatrist considers whether they think it's appropriate for us? And so they're questions to be resolved still. Yeah.
So again, if you're thinking about making a submission, think about underlining the idea that these need to come from us, not the psychiatrist making a decision about what's necessary or what's reasonable. And the other thing was thinking about legislative strategies to reduce compulsory treatment. So this was some of the things that might, in a system-wide space, not on an individual level, but on a system-wide space, might make a difference. So things like having other mental health professionals deciding on an order, so not just a psychiatrist. That's not in the white paper, but there is reference to including other health professionals, but that's not actually what we asked for. That compulsory treatments stop if physical health is impacted. Again, there's a mention of increased distress, but not an impact on physical health. So again, it wasn't what we asked for. And no mention at all about removing high-risk treatments or off-label medications, which again had a really strong message that people shouldn't be being given these really high-risk treatments that have potential long-term impacts on people's lives on compulsory treatment orders. So again, here's a quote that there needs to be an upper limit. They can't just drug people into oblivion. It must be reviewed often. So again, a sense that the longer nature of compulsory treatments often means people are drugged for a long time, as we know. So this is like the message was really clear that consumers wanted, if compulsory treatment was going to stay, then it needed to be really much more strongly controlled, and that there needed to be more emphasis on the impact of compulsory treatment on the person, both in terms of their physical health and their emotional health or psychological health, however you want to think about that. But that was a very clear message from the consultations. So I'm going to hand back to Indy now.
No worries. Now, what have we got? We've got a minute. Is that right? So I'm going to do a super fast cut down version here. What should happen? You never will have seen a fat lady talk so fast. Support supported decision making. We actually had quite a lot of questions about supported decision making in the survey, and we asked about advanced statements and how to strengthen them. We asked about nominated persons and what's important about those, because I often get really confused. What's important, if anything, depending on what people said about second psychiatric opinions, and what is it that we want to see in the Act. And there is lots of detail on this in the report, but this is the main message. This is the quick version. What people said is, with supported decision-making, if our decisions aren't binding, it's not supported decision-making. Having advanced statements that can't be upheld, that can just be really easily overridden, it's not supported decision-making, it's tokenistic. So that was really, really clear from people, and we've made that really clear in the report and to government. It's not translated into the white paper. Information sharing, the super quick version here, there was again lots of questions about this, but one issue that's been quite important and was raised back when I was at Thematic, when we were doing some work around this topic, that people were saying we want to be able to name excluded persons as well as nominated persons, people that the service can't listen to or speak to about our information. And, you know, most extreme example would be situations of family violence, where services might speak to an abusive partner, but there's many reasons. This was, and I think this might have been the only one, Brenda, from memory. This had 100, what am I trying to say?
A median score of 100. It meant that it was the highest rating score for inclusion. It wasn't, not everybody said yes, but when the median score is worked out, it came out at 100.
Yep, so an average of 100 out of 100. And also incredibly high was the question of, is it important that we always have to give consent before our private and medical information is shared with carers and families? And as many of us know, this has long been a contentious issue in the consumer carer space. And typically carer advocacy will say it's important for carers and families to have information about us. And typically consumers have said, actually, we're entitled to the right to privacy and we need to give consent. And this was reinforced in the survey. And this is included in the white paper. Consent's been retained in there, but that will be at risk when in submissions. That will be important. If it matters to you, it'll be important to name. And I'm not going to speak to accountability and transparency, except to say people were really clear that they want to see actual evidence of services being held accountable for what they're doing, because it is not clear that that happens at the moment. And that means statutory bodies using their powers visibly and having reports available, and also having strong, well-defined powers. And so I'll finish on this one. And these are the other words from our from every participants' hearts to this. This was quite lovely, really. It was a moment where we just remembered that there are real human beings sitting in the Department of Health writing a new act in the white paper, I guess. And what did people want to say from their own hearts to the hearts of the people doing that work? And when we spoke to people at the Department of Health, we invited them to print these out as posters and keep them up next to their desks while they were doing this work. So there's one little cheeky word in there if people can find it. I won't say who it's from, but it was a legitimate word. I'll give you a hint. But we don't edit out the voice of consumers, so it stayed in there. So that's it from us. We went over by 3 minutes. Sorry, Kathy. Where non-compliance is the first step towards recovery.
Well, I would think it's very modest non-compliance, but I'm going to join you in non-compliance for a moment. We're meant to go straight on to Chris, but what I'm going to do is ask people, if you have questions of clarification for Indigo and Vrinda, would you take a moment now and pop them in the chat so that we capture them and we'll answer them on the web on our website if we don't get to answering them today. So just a minute or two if you want to hop into chat and just add your questions in, because we don't want to lose them. And often that's what gets truncated in these sort of conversations. So any question of clarification, please just add it in. And then what I'm going to do after a minute or two, I'm going to ask Indigo and Brenda to have a look and see what are those questions are, and maybe just pick one or two that seem to be common or you might not have covered how you wanted to answer them. And then I will hand over to Chris to move on to what's happening next. So this will only be a little part of the question time, but I just think maybe it follows on better.
Yeah, that's lovely, Kathy. Thank you.
And every question, I can't say no question is a stupid question because lots are, but every question is welcome and will be respected and answered. All right. Now, while people are typing, I'm going to ask you to do some split concentration. If Indigo and Brenda, you see any questions come up you think are really important just to touch on in a couple of minutes now, would you start off doing? I'm sorry to have given you no notice about this, but would you jump in and do it?
Yeah, Kathy, that's fine. And I'm thinking with Angela's question there on ECT as well, it might fit better with Chris than with us, because I've only done because it's a question about the white paper rather than the report.
So this is questions now on the report. Yes. And then we'll have a little bit more question time of Chris about what's next, which is the white paper and responding to it. So yeah. Let Angela's question to sit till then, but if there are any that are immediate relevant.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's a great question though, Angela. I'd like to know the answer to that as well.
So have we got stuff now to talk about, or are we ready just to move on?
Ready to go. There's no questions.
Okay.
Either we answered them all or we were profoundly boring.
Or maybe there's just processing time. And that's part of what this next part of the process is about. So I'm going to hand over to Chris. And Chris, who is the Deputy CEO, Deputy Chair of VMIAC. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and the work you've been doing recently, or holding the space for VMIAC around, and to talk about what's next.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everybody. Great to see you all here today. My name's Chris Bailey. I'm on Wurundjeri country. The Kulin Nation land was never ceded. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. The reason I'm talking, I was asked by Maggie Toko, our very recently previous CEO, to represent VMIAC's position on the expert advisory group that has been giving advice to the department on this legislation. And so I've been asked today to, I guess, talk about that and VMIAC's involvement. I will say, for a start, it's great that VMIAC was invited to be on that group. So I think that's really important. And I think Indigo and Brenda have noted that there's some of the things that we've raised have been picked up. And I'll talk to some of them and pick up on some of the things that Indigo and Brenda mentioned. But I think it's really important to start off by acknowledging that the process isn't, sorry, this is Douglas, my assistant, just making some noise in the background there, getting comfortable. The process is not co-produced. It's not an attempt at co-production, and that's a really poor start, I think, for the government. But I do have to be very clear that I think the criticisms that I have about this process and that VMIAC has about this process really are about the way that the Royal Commission has recommended that the next steps go. So the government in advance accepted that they would implement all the recommendations. And then one of those recommendations is that we need new legislation by the end of this year, or by mid next year at the earliest. Now, it's just not possible. The Royal Commission should have known that it's not possible to do a co-produced process in that time. And so that's where we are. That's why we're here. And I think VMIAC's been really clear the whole way through that really that's not good enough. And the other thing that's really important to remember is that the Royal Commission also said there's a whole bunch of stuff like advanced statements that you don't look at that now. So they said to the government, don't think about that for this legislation. We're going to look at that in 5 years' time. There's going to be another review in 5 years' time. And we said, that's not good enough. We need to do that now. And they said, sorry, we're doing what the Royal Commission says, which is focusing on these issues. And so that's really why we are where we are, is because the Royal Commission has said, here's where it is. And you can see, and I do encourage you to do this. Rita's going to talk to this when I finish, but the consultation that is being done now by the government about what should go in the legislation is pretty much all, do you think we've done what the Royal Commission said we should do? This consultation is not what should we do with the new legislation. It kind of is, but the focus is, have we done what the Royal Commission said we should do? And so that's really important, I think, for us to bear in mind. If we're going to throw rocks, then we need to throw them at the right spot. And I think, we understand why. If anyone's going, well, hang on, why is it so quick? It's because there's an election next year, right? I mean, that's not a secret, and they want to get all the kind of main stuff done as soon as possible, so that it gets stuck in. Because otherwise, if we have a change of government at the next election, we might lose all of this. The other side of politics hasn't said that they will pick up all the Royal Commission recommendations. So that's what the urgency is. So I think for VMIAC now, the key for us is that we want the review to be next year or the year after, a proper co-design process, not 5 years, not 7 years, not 10 years, but that needs to happen really quickly. And so that's our focus now at VMIAC, is how do we apply pressure to get that happening really quickly. So, okay, all of that is context. What have we got so far in the Act? Effectively, it's the same piece of legislation as we had before. There are lots of changes, but nothing monumental. You would, as a person in the system, right? So not as a lawyer or an academic or an activist or whatever, you could go all the way through the system with this piece of legislation and not notice the difference with the current legislation. So there's a lot that's the same. It's still got compulsory treatment. It's still not human rights compliant. It's not compliant with the CRPD. It's not compliant with the Victorian Charter of Human Rights. So it doesn't really represent the fundamental change that we were promised by the Royal Commission. But again, that's the Royal Commission's. That's on the Royal Commission. That's not on the government now. As such, we just need to pressure them to bring the review forward. So those important reforms have been pushed back. We're still seeing seclusion and restraint, so that's a big problem. And the time frame, as Indigo and Brenda said, is really long, way too long for elimination of seclusion and restraint. The governance stuff is really unclear. There's going to be 8 mental health boards and a new mental health and wellbeing commission. That has the potential to be an enormous mess, apart from anything else. But it does represent a real opportunity if we get the right people in those positions. If we have a really strong leadership in those positions, then actually it could make a real difference to have that commission in there. We haven't seen the kind of change we wanted to see with the Mental Health Complaints Commission so far, and the new Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission is going to have basically the same powers, but with some data, access to data stuff as well. So with the right people in those positions, that could make a big difference. What's good? I'm going to finish on what's good in the new Act. It's got non-legal advocacy. What's bad is that that's not specifically IMA. People love IMA; they don't love advocacy in general. And so, if you do make a submission, have a think about whether you want IMA doing the advocacy or whether you're happy for a community organisation like NEMI or Mind or someone like that to be running the advocacy service instead, because that's kind of what the Royal Commission has kind of allowed for. So the principles and objectives are stacks better. There's some principles specifically on gender and trauma and things like that I think, nobody reads the principles in the current Act anyway, but I think as a starting point, they're improved. There's a shift. I think this is really great. There's a shift from we need to let people exercise their rights to services must be compliant with the rights. Does that make sense? So in the past, it was about how can we tell people what their rights are so that they can exercise them. Now it's like, no, I mean, you shouldn't even have to know what your rights are. You should just get them. right? And that is a shift in language in the Act, and let's see if that works. So there's a shift from rights to the responsibility of services. The last resort could be huge. If we are talking genuinely that compulsory treatment is the last resort, then we probably never need to use it, right? If we have a system that works really well, then we should never get to the point of compulsory treatment, because we should be providing people with support that they need when they need it. So obviously that's me living in a fantasy land right now, but just that language I think is important, that we're not, that there is a shift there anyway. Whether it works or not, I don't know. Distress rather than deterioration, I think, is really key in the treatment criteria. So it used to be, if you're going to deteriorate, then we can treat you. Now it's, are you distressed? And there's a lot of people out there who are being told by doctors that they have symptoms, and told by friends and family they have symptoms, but they're cool with it and they're not distressed. And so why are we treating them? And so ideally, all those people now won't be compulsorily treated, and they'll be able to access those services voluntarily as they want to. So it will focus on distress. Imminent and serious harm, Indigo and Brenda have talked to, so that's good as well. And then requiring that all other treatment and support options to prevent the distress or harm have been considered and eliminated. So it's not enough for the doctor just to say, nah, this is the right medication for you and you have to take it, sorry, here's a glass of water. They have to actually work through everything first. Now, there's a bit of a problem that the doctors get to consider what other support options there are, and that's not up to the consumer, but it's an improvement. Rights protections for voluntary consumers, that's really good. So hopefully there'll be no more, look, you're voluntary, but you're not allowed to leave the hospital. That sort of stuff should go. We'll see if that works or not. Advanced statements have been strengthened, but they're still nowhere near close enough to what we need. Information sharing is strengthened. That's a real win, I think, actually. As Indigo said, that's always a contentious issue. And I think if we do this right, and we have a genuinely consent-based information sharing system, and if we get excluded persons in there, then I think that'll make a lot of people feel a lot safer in mental health services, particularly people who are escaping violence. And so I think if you want excluded persons, put that in there, put that in your submission. I think put that in a link or participate in this process so you can do that. Finally, this is a bit weaker than we'd wanted. We'd wanted a lot more access to files and records and things like that, and for consumers to be much more involved in that process and to have unrestricted access to their files. But at the very least, access will be a lot easier now to health records, and people will be able to put in a statement if they disagree with what's in their record. And so that will mean that even if you can't get the doctor to change the information that's not right in there or that you disagree with, then you'll be able to write a statement saying, no, this is rubbish, and other people who read it, like the tribunal, will read that statement and not just have the doctor's perspective. So we would have liked that to be a bit stronger, but that's another improvement. So I think as you can see, kind of in summary, yeah, there's stacks in there, and the department's been working really hard to fit what they can in around what the restrictions of the Royal Commission. But so I think it's a definite improvement, but it's absolutely not the fundamental reform that we've been demanding. And we were kind of expecting, I think, maybe that's just my naivety, but I was anticipating something really fundamental and real change. And that's just not in the Royal Commission's report. They just haven't recommended that. And so that's what we've got. And this is where we are. So I'm very happy to take any questions. I haven't been following in the chat, but
okay, so Robin, with this one, we won't do the questions on the chat. I mean, you're very welcome to add them into the chat. If you just put your hand up either physically or by your little symbol, your little hand symbol, and I'll get Robin, because you'll be able to have a better view than me, just invite people to ask their questions.
Now, there was a question about ECT. There's as far as I'm aware, at this point, there is no change anticipated to ECT other than the broader principles in the Act, and things like last resort and distress rather than deterioration. All those things will flow down through into ECT, but it's still going to be applied involuntarily. People are still going to get it even when they don't want it. So that basic things to, this is what I mean. It's going to, probably fewer people will get ECT as a result of this act, but people are still going to have it even when they don't want it.
And
yeah, I can see Sophie's hand up.
Thanks, Chris. This has been absolutely brilliant. In terms of their commitment to reduce compulsory treatment as much as possible, I don't know what people think about an idea that came up when they were looking at drafts of the 2014 Act to prevent people who have capacity being forced to have compulsory treatment. So limiting compulsory treatment to people who are determined to not have capacity. And look, I know that kind of a couple of ways of looking at that, but if they're serious about minimising compulsory treatment, you know, there's a view that that's something they should do, because it's, I mean, the discrimination cuts both ways potentially, but it is discriminatory that people diagnosed with mental illness who have capacity can be still forced to have treatment.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I think that's a really important question. Certainly, there's people here from the department, and they will they will be able to confirm that this was something that we talked about a lot. The MEAC's position is that capacity-based legislation is still not human rights compliant, and people need to be supported to exercise their capacity rather than be assessed as not having capacity. But certainly in terms of local human rights compliance, in terms of the charter compliance, people with capacity should not be involuntarily treated. However, the Royal Commission didn't recommend that, and so it's not on the table. So this is kind of the problem, Sophie, is that I think this is the sort of thing that will be central to the review, and I am very hopeful, perhaps naive, but hopeful that in the review, when it comes, that will include a capacity assessment for compulsory treatment. I think that will be on the table then, and particularly there'll be capacity assessments for binding psychiatric advance directives, and that'll have the same effect essentially. But it's just not under consideration at the moment, which is a real shame. Although you do see in jurisdictions where they do have that test, as you well know, I know, Sophie, where there is a capacity assessment, people just get told they don't have capacity all the time. So it doesn't seem to make much difference. Yeah.
okay,
Helen, I can see your hand up.
just to let you know, there's time for one more question, and then if you need to leave questions in the chat, we'll follow up with them.
Yeah.
So it's Helen, I think.
Yeah. So thanks, Chris, and indeed, Verinda, for your amazing work. So do you think supported decision-making being strengthened can be a way to work with that, Chris? Because I suppose working with people, supporting people who can't make decisions to be able to make their own decisions. But what it sounds like you're saying is actually that won't really matter either, because there's still the ability to substitute decision make regardless.
Yeah. I think that's probably right. Certainly there are attempts. So for example, voluntary patients will have a better understanding of their rights. I use the word patients because that's in the current act, but voluntary people will have a better understanding. And so that'll help. I think there'll be less kind of grey area coercion because of that. But if you've got substituted decision-making, people are going to use it. The clinicians are going to use it. And so there's been a lot of discussion about how much we can do with legislation, how much we have to change the thinking of clinicians, and how bad legislation is about that. When we started the advisory group, I said around this paper, it's a really great study done in Europe, comparing different legislation, different jurisdictions. Mental health legislation has almost no impact on compulsory treatment rates. If you want to look at what's causing compulsory treatment, it's not the way the legislation is put together. So helping people to make their own decisions is really about getting clinicians to think differently. I think the legislation is part of the story. I don't think it's nothing, but that's generally the sense, is that we can't. The Royal Commission said we've still got compulsory treatment, still going to be part of the system. Minimising it is going to be down to leadership and culture change. Don't know, Indy and Verinda, if you wanted to add to that.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Chris, I think this is disputable, but I reckon for many of us, there's a strong link between compulsory treatment and seclusion and restraint. that when we're being forced to have treatments we don't want, that some of us can get pretty angry about that, understandably, and that can then lead to being secluded or restrained. And so I think I'm interested to see, because of the focus on eliminating seclusion and restraint, but not eliminating compulsory treatment, I think that will become very hard. And I think as well, I'm interested in, if seclusion and restraint are eliminated, how will it be possible to enforce compulsory treatment if we just flat out refuse? And so there's a connection there that I don't see. I don't understand how that's going to work. I think there could be some great opportunities for more freedom for us, or it's going to be really messy.
So I just might leave that one there. But I think what it's saying is there's some deep conversations to be had, some really important deep conversations for different people on this screen, but others to join in with as part of the next steps. So I wanted to hand over to Vrinda to let you know how we're going to try and handle and support the next part of the process, and hopefully create some spaces for these conversations and response. So Vrinda, do you mind taking it from here?
Yeah. Thanks, Kathy. And we'll keep this really sort of quick. But one of the VMACs invited me to do some work around this, and how can we support you to make a submission to the white paper, as well as supporting VMAC to write something that's really robust in response. So multiple people have put in the chat the link to the white paper. I think you said it's also going to be on the website, Robin? Yeah.
I have linked a page on the website where it has the report and the white paper, as well as what are you talking about now as well?
Yeah, fantastic. So what I'm planning to do is have some explanation, so some tip sheets, if you like, on how to write a submission. So how you can respond to both the questions that are in there, as Chris was pointing out, but I do think it's also an opportunity to say more. So I don't think you need to just stick to the question. I think it's good to answer the question that they've put up, but actually use the opportunity to say some more. So I'll provide some tip sheets. They should be available on Tuesday next week for loading up onto the website, and you'll be able to download those from the website. But also on Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And I think you're going to, there'll be some more information on the website soon, Robin, about this.
It's all up there already.
Oh, fantastic. Gee, well done, Robin. Because we only set the time this morning. So 4 o'clock, Tuesday afternoon, we'll have another webinar. I'll talk through the submission, the white paper, in a little bit more detail, in particular focusing on the questions that are being asked and giving some hints and advice. So I'll be available for questions as well. So if you've already looked at the white paper and you have some questions, then, come along and we'll do what we can. The other thing is that VMAC is going to have some staff available throughout the next 2 weeks to help as well. So if at any point you've got a question about the submission, or not sure about what to say or how to say something in response to the commission, then just make, in response to the white paper, just make contact with VMAC and we will try our best to get back to you. Eventually the submission, once VMAC's approved the submission, that I'm sure will also be available up on the website for people to have a look at what VMAC is saying.
Yep.
So that's about it in a nutshell, in an absolute nutshell.
Just want to quickly promote that to register for that event on Tuesday, I have put the event registration in the chat already. And if you want to do the one-on-one sessions, you can give us a call or email reception. I've just put those contact details in the chat as well, and we've already discussed it. We've already got it all set up here as well.
So thank you, Vrinda. So I know we're very close to time. So this lunchtime launch, I hope it's not giving you indigestion, but it has been speedy and it's such a lot of information. But I really do want to encourage you to keep being part of the conversation through the mechanisms VMIAC has put in place. And I probably shouldn't say this, a bit more non-compliance, but if we find over the next weeks we've missed the spot somehow, we'll see if we can make an adjustment. Because the main thing is to, like, given this is apart from what it is and how important it is in its own right, this is one of the first opportunities we have post the recommendations to say, we are here, this is what we think. We do expect you to listen and to partner. So please get any backup from us that we're able to offer to take that first step with us. So I think I'm about to close. If anyone had any last quick word, I'd be very happy to hear it or pop it in the chat. This, as you know, this session's recorded, so you can listen to some of the detail again. Someone, who's that?
Hi, my name's Isha, and I work within the mental health and disability sector. I work for an organization called Impactful Women, and we are working on grants. At the moment, I'm a grants writer, and in terms of like my passions as well, like I do a lot of advocacy work with young people, you know, people who've just been to hospital, and you know, people within the CALD communities that find it difficult to access treatment because of interpretation issues and stuff. I'm actually currently working on a short film with, you know, like I'm working on the script and working on the execution of it at the moment. I would really love any advice on how I can get young people involved in this project, or any sort of adults or stakeholders involved in this project.
Okay, so just to be able, it's a little sidetrack from where we are now, so, but I'll respond to it, which is saying, if you can pass your details on through Robin, we'll send it through our membership area and see if there's any way we can think that through with you through there. And I think that's the best we can do for now on this one, but you know, absolutely good on you for trying to make some space in the younger people world. So anybody, last words on this subject?
Jane's got a hand up, Kathy.
Please go.
I've just got a quick question. I've just come out of hospital and I'm just wondering, within the Royal Commission and the paper, are there any, there's other practices that go on in hospitals that aren't covered, that haven't been discussed. Things like, for example, not allowing you to do activities at night if you're a person that sleeps during the day, things like that, which are distressing as well. And I'm just wondering whether those things are, you know, even talked about, like, yeah. And the restrictions on smoking is another thing, you know, especially which has happened through COVID. So, yeah, there's other things that I feel lengthened my stay that aren't generally discussed because of policy and procedures at the hospitals, because we fall under the entire hospital, and the psych department is influenced by the rest of the hospital. These policies are put in place that are detrimental to you recovering in hospital.
Yeah. Virendra, Indigo, yeah?
Yeah, I'm happy. Hey, Jane, thanks for sharing. I'm sorry you had to have that experience recently. We've had conversations before about hospital. Yeah, there is so much stuff, of course, that we didn't mention today. So many issues, and sometimes good things too. I don't want to just only be a negative Nancy, but there's so many issues. Not everything which Chris talked about is necessarily best addressed in legislation. So we know that there's things in the current legislation that's just not followed. Most services that I've seen don't follow the Act in terms of our right to communication and access to our mobile phones. They just ignore it and do what they want and confiscate things. And so part of that issue that Chris was speaking about, I think, is about practice change. How do we change not just practice, but the culture of services? And And so that's not stuff for the Act. And I've got to say, and I can't give you an answer because I have a big hope bucket and a big cynical bucket, and they're both as full as each other. And so part of me thinks that we can transform that stuff, but it'll be really hard and take a really long time. And part of me thinks that those kinds of changes, where they'll matter, is in the new kinds of services that the Royal Commission has asked to be created that aren't hospital-based, when we get community-based respite and peer-run services. And that's where we're going to see and model and be able to access better practice, I think. That's the best I could do quickly, Jane. I don't know if that helps at all. It's not good enough. I know it shits me as well. Sorry.
I think that's right, Indy. That's my position too, at least. Jane, I don't know if you could get a cup of tea whenever you wanted in the place that you were staying, but there's still places in this state you can't get a cup of tea whenever you want. Yeah, 2 cups of tea a day, that's it. And if we could legislate that everyone gets a cup of tea whenever they want, then I would be strongly supportive of that. But it's just not what legislation's for. This is one tiny bit of what we need to fix with the mental health system, and that other stuff is only going to happen when we've got peer-run services. You don't need to legislate peer-run services to give people cups of tea, because it's just how you do it. So I think that's the key, is that we really need to keep pushing in all those other directions as well.
So Jane, we will make sure that we keep you informed about any of the consultations or co-design processes that are happening around any of these new services. And we'll absolutely make sure that this sort of conversation happens and informs that co-design work. So I don't know whether we can particularly keep in touch with you about it, but just know that keep watching the website. And one of the things for VMIAC is the landscape is so broad. Our intention is to be wherever we can be, as clearly and as loudly as we can be. And co-design of services and change of culture within existing services is very much part of that story.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
So I think that might be it. I know we're a little bit over time. So last words for this day in the chat, but I just want to thank everybody for their time, but also just to keep encouraging the conversation to continue over the next while, and the contribution to continue over the next while. So are we ready to complete for the day? So thank you all. Thank you for the people who listened. Thank you for the people who asked questions. Thank you for the people who spoke. And thank you for the people that did all the background work. So that's it for today. See you all. Thank you.